Good morning. It is good to be here with you this morning in this congregation that feels like home. For those of you who don't know me that well, certainly you've probably interacted with my wife, Stephanie, but this is the congregation I grew up in. My parents, Bob and Linda, are longtime congregants here, and it is a real thrill to be back here and preaching. I remember my father preaching back when we were at Rockway School, so it's kind of neat to be back here in this capacity. I'm glad to be able to share some reflections on the values our money and habits reflects or exposes, and how we might think about money in the context of our faith. I've spent the last number of years working in financial services and really thinking about money and the role it plays, what we do with it, in sharing it, how we spend it, how we save it, how we borrow, what we invest. It percolates our lives. Philanthropy, social responsible investing, impact investing, much of my work has been directed towards that kind of positive, doing better with money. And some folks in this congregation I've interacted with on this journey. I've framed my thoughts around the following questions. Where do we find ourselves? What is money? What values do we want our money to reflect? And then what should we do about it? So, to begin, where do we find ourselves? The world around us is in ruins. There are more people in slavery, 50 million estimated, than ever before. 100 million people are displaced as refugees from war, economic and climate catastrophes. Climate change is irreversible. There are more armed conflicts globally than at any time. The unaffordability of housing is all around us. Our social infrastructure, healthcare, education systems are struggling. Our ecosystems are strained. Racism, sexism, and marginalization of equity-deserving groups pervades in the government, social structures all around us. Our churches are shrinking or becoming more polarized. Individualism and isolationism is eroding communities and families. The collective we is lonely and struggling with mental health and depression at alarming rates. The global population keeps growing and demands more and more resources to sustain it. Inequality is a global disease. And the 2,000-year-old words attributed to Paul in 1 Timothy still hold true. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. Mary Mellor, a professor emeritus in the UK focused on feminist and green economics, characterizes the current capitalist market economy's primary aim as not the provision of essential goods and services for the people, but the investment of money and labor in activities that provide even more money, i.e. profit, for the owners of capital. This characterization is not unique, but I'm introducing her now since I'll quote her later. In the face of greed, the Old Testament psalm offers words of caution that still ring true. Redemption does not come so easily, for no one can ever pay enough to live forever and never see the grave. Jewish tradition ascribes these words to the sons of Korah as they call out their father's greed and advise that he should be focused on his spiritual journey here on earth before going to the afterlife. The story of Korah is indeed a cautionary tale. His greed and lust for power prompted him to foment a rebellion against Moses. But God sent fire from heaven and caused the earth to open up and swallow him and his 250 followers. Is this so different than the messages younger generations now cry for climate justice? As greed continues to dominate, the earth is getting warmer, and may swallow all of us up. Thousands of years later, and we haven't learned to change our ways. This is the doom and gloom that surrounds us, and is the story that gets told, and this is not the full story. We also know that the world is full of beauty and positive progress. Poverty rates are falling, health outcomes are improving, and leading to longer lives. There are pockets of ecosystem rejuvenation and reforestation. And as people of faith, we know God is with us. This is where we find ourselves. Now we turn to the question, what is money and what are its current values? In a moment of humility, after feeling quite clever about my sermon title and the use of parentheses around the S in values, I happened upon Mark Carney's book, written a couple years ago, Values, Building a Better World for All. Carney, whose pedigree includes being the former governor of both the Bank of Canada and UK, is a leading voice in rallying global finance to take the climate into account. Given the serendipity of both of us using the parenthetical S, I gave it a read. His book offers both a history of monetary and economic thought and a picture of where capitalism should go to be better for the world. Given that economies are assessed primarily with money as the unit of measurement, the concept of value for each is largely interchangeable, and so for simplicity's sake, I won't be distinguishing between economic value and monetary value. I'm going to conflate the two. Carney outlines two historical perspectives on value. The objective approach puts emphasis on the effort that goes into producing something, including wages, labor, and methods of production. The subjective approach puts value in the exchange. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and whatever the parties involved agree is the value becomes true. In recounting the history of money, people love the story of the West Pacific island of Yap, now part of Micronesia. The residents used immense stone discs, some as big as 12 feet, as a medium of exchange in important transactions. These could be, where tribes are meeting, where families are joining together. Often the moving of the discs wasn't practical, so they left them where they were, and simply the ownership was transferred. In one circumstance, a disc that was quarried and being transported by boat caused the boat to sink and fell to the ocean floor. This accident, however, did not change its representative value, and so continued to be used for years as a method of exchange. So, in our present day, money can be seen as both a store of value and a medium of exchange, as well as a unit of account. Charles Eisenstein, author of Sacred Economics, talks about money in a more expansive way. He says, money is a system of social agreements, meanings, and symbols that develops over time. It is, in a word, a story, existing in social reality along with such things as laws, nations, institutions, the calendar and clock time, religion and science. Stories bear tremendous creative power. Through them, we coordinate human activity, focus attention and intention, define roles, and identify what is important and even what is real. Stories give meaning and purpose to life and therefore motivate action. End of quote. This money as a system and a story view makes it, the vehicle. But it's not the story itself. For example, in bringing our faith story into it, yes, there are more passages involving money than anything else in the Bible, but no one says the Bible is a story about money. The same could be said for verses about food. There's tons of verses about food in the Bible, but nobody says it's a story about food and money. That's not what this story is about. The values at the center of the story transcend the details. They even transcend whether the biblical story is fact or fiction. So too, the story of money. I find myself a bit surprised to be quoting Milton Friedman, but I will. In an essay about the previously mentioned island of Yap, he writes, "How important myth, unquestioned belief, is in monetary matters. Our own money, the money we have grown up with, the system under which it is controlled, these appear real and rational to us. The money of other countries often seems to us like paper or worthless metal, even when the purchasing power of individual units is high." End quote. The story of money is often both fact and fiction. For example, in the creation of money, we like to think that it is created by nation states, distributed through a variety of means, that finds a home in deposit accounts, and that funds loans. Most of that is fiction. In simplified terms, while it is true that central bank institutions are key to the creation of money, they typically account for less than 20% of money creation. Only 3% is in bank-issued currency. The other 80% of money that is created every day is through loans by banks, credit unions, other financial institutions. Our money is debt. That is its core value. You will get your treasure in the future. I'll get back to the debt piece in a minute, but let me pause at this moment and not overlook who gets to tell the story of money and its value. When tracing the history of monetary and economic thought, it is overwhelmingly white men that get the spotlight and that make up the audience. Most of them are Christian. It was striking in reading Carney's outlining of economic thought. Aristotle, Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Milton Friedman, John Maynard Keynes. Though I'll leave this as mostly obvious, I will note that other perspectives exist. 3 quick examples. Our Muslim relatives reject the idea that money is a store of value, and that only when it is exchanged into something concrete does it find its value. 2, since most loans are secured by land, and policies existed for centuries, still exist, that prevented Black, Indigenous, and people of color from owning land, our money is steeped in racism. 3, feminists of all genders continue to point out the sexism of measures like the GDP, the main measure of a nation's economy, as it does not place any value in the care economy. Really? The work of child rearing has no economic value? What fiction? Back to the debt piece. Carney writes, "Money is like an IOU that applies to everyone. We all owe you." The most important role that central banks and public institutions play is in providing public trust. That is their key value. We believe in the system, and it works, as long as we believe in it and trust it. When this trust is abused, or doubt becomes too great, we get the laundry list of financial collapses. The most pressing challenge faced in finance today is the recognition that most of the IOUs promise an unsustainable future, i.e. never-ending growth. The recognition of this lie often encourages an everyone-for-themselves approach, scarcity thinking. Eisenstein writes, "It is ironic indeed that money, originally a means of connecting gifts with needs, originally an outgrowth of a sacred gift economy, is now precisely what blocks the blossoming of our desire to give, keeping us in deadening jobs out of economic necessity and forestalling our most generous impulses." So, what do we want our money to inhabit, reflect? What is the question of what values we want reflected in our economic lives? Meller gives us a series of questions to think about. Since all modern currencies are created out of nothing, their value sustained by public trust and state authority, why are states and their citizens shackled in debt? Why can't the people simply create the money they need to be free of debt? Why can't that money be circulated in a not-for-profit, social, or public sector? Why base the principles that govern our economic system on the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and the hidden hand of the market, rather than the doctor, the teacher, the care worker, the artist, and the not-so-hidden hand of a solidarity economy? Indeed, why not? But what do we want? Sometimes I think we lack imagination, or the right kind of imagination. Remember, I was trying to be clever in my sermon title. Well, here is a bit more of my thinking there. Here's what I was trying to get at in a pithy way. In my thinking, the singular value roots us in the present. That rootedness prompts us to think more about what we might purchase or obtain with money. The parentheses around the S immediately call the present into question and broaden the word values to connect the past, what values we bring to money, and the future, what we aspire to money, our money to reflect. Finally, the title could have been The Values of Money, but including the our and not your pulls us into thinking of the societal, communal nature of how money operates. Money on its own holds no value. It is only through connection with other humans that it takes on meaning and value. So too is human life imbued with value by social connections and qualitative values that are difficult to quantify. Carney identifies life is what some economists term a non-positional good. That means no part of a life's value stems from the ownership of comparable goods by others. We do not feel any better off when those around us have less life, though we may feel better off when we have a nicer car. Positional research has demonstrated that more people will prefer a smaller house if it is bigger relative to those of their neighbors than a larger house is smaller in relative terms. We let the stuff get in the way and allow our money to be rooted in the stuff. If we allow our imagination to think of money in new ways, we might pick some different values, like those post-its. Wellness, creation care, inclusion, equity, happiness, longevity. We might pick these things. So, what should we do? My friend Bryant used to quip about redeeming money. Is that even possible? Can we as people of faith put our money where our mouth is? Is that what God wants us to do? Here I will finally get to the parable of the three servants, or more commonly known as the parable of the talents. We're all familiar with this story, and most of us would recognize the interpretation that the money is symbolic. We really love when the translation is talents, because we can talk about the other meaning of talents, which leads us to feel good about how we are all unique, and God has given us unique and special abilities. What we really need to do is share those with others so that everyone benefits. God, i.e. the Master, will bless us with more. Go and do likewise. But this is a parable that sits without a tidy explanation from Jesus. What if that's not the right interpretation? Perhaps it really is about money and economic status. I know we say we don't, but who doesn't love a good prosperity gospel? In this story, the rich get richer. The middle class stays middle class, and the poor should have done what the rich people do, but they were too scared, so they get penalized for staying poor. Jesus said the poor will always be with us, right? Invest your money and you will have earthly riches and heavenly riches. Or, what if the master in the story is not God? But instead, this story of a wicked, selfish master that is rewarded for doing nothing, but having people to do all the work for him. People he doles out based on a meritocracy, and when those who have been given the least don't live up to his expectations, he punishes them. Here then is a story of privilege, oppression, and abuse. We are called to see the hypocrisy and injustice in this story and object. We are called to stand with the oppressed. For you may know that this parable is followed by the parable of the sheep and the goats, where those that do not recognize Jesus in the hungry and the destitute are punished while they plead ignorance. Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. We must change the interpretations and the whole story of money from reading into it what usually makes us most comfortable while the world around us burns. Just as Jesus reminds us of who we should look after, we must look the same way for the transformation of our money. I believe living out the giving to God what is God's will end up transforming giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. If Palmer Becker's summary of Anabaptism holds true, and Byron, I see you this morning, Jesus is the center of our faith. Community is the center of our life. Reconciliation is the center of our work. Can we base money on Jesus' guidance? Use money for peace and justice? I think we must be dogmatic in our imagination, for the rhymers, and use our money to deepen community, wherever Paul Bourne is. Don't worry, I'll stop now before I end up flying with the King of Kings, like my father. Reconciling the world in the context of community and following Jesus' path involves selling our possessions, perhaps literally, but certainly metaphorically. To begin with, we must change who we listen to. We know, in listening to indigenous peoples, that we must change our view of land that secures the layered IOUs. We can listen to our Muslim relatives who base lending on shared ownership. We can listen to a chorus of women who are creatively imagining something different, like Kate Raworth's Donut Economics, that identifies the critical human and ecological systems that overshoot or undershoot to preserve us. Or Mariana Mazzucato, who challenges and flips the business is creative, government suppresses innovation narrative. And in listening to these people, we can question the institutions, the funds, the governments that support our money. We can question ourselves, challenge them and us when they and we say, this is how it is. We need to demand more or organize alternatives. We can advocate for and choose products that demonstrate through transparent, accountable methods that they are better for the planet and our local communities. We can cover the world with values and make them more than just sticky notes. The story of money is changing and needs to continue to change to save ourselves from ourselves. We can be participants in transforming the story, just as the words of Jesus and the story of our faith continue to transform us. This transformation of money can be part of how we live out our faith, our value, and our values.